And welcome to Sass Bites. This is your weekly bite of Sass during your lunch break. I'm your host, Micah Godbolt, and with me, as always, is Lise Holiday. Awesome for her to be able to show up and join us today. So we are in the middle of actually maybe even wrapping up. I'm hoping to get a couple other people on here, but I think we're getting close to the end of this series on front-end architecture. Started back in January or something. We've been going on it for a while. And what we've been doing is talking about front-end architecture and also talking to the people that are out there currently doing front-end architecture, or at least a part of it. Whether that's doing visual regression testing, or working deeply with style guides, or doing really good like CSS architecture and naming conventions and SPACs and those kind of things. So today I wanted to bring in a special guest that I actually got a chance to meet when I was giving this talk back at CSS DevConf. And she is kind of more on the JavaScript side. She was actually a JavaScript developer that came and spoke at a CSS conference. So it was a lot of fun. But obviously, JavaScript is a large portion of the architecture that you want to build up for your site. And a lot of us that are coming to front-end architecture, especially from the front-end side, are usually coming in with just like, we know jQuery. We can click on things and make things happen. So, how do we scale that, and how do we set up an architecture that's going to make sense? If we do bring on some stronger JavaScript developers and get them more into some larger JavaScript applications and do those types of things. So, it's always that big question of does it scale? So unfortunately today we have our special guest is Rebecca Murphey. She's a staff software engineer at Bazaarvoice, where she leads a large team that oversees third-party JavaScript applications. So deep in the weeds of JavaScript. She's a frequent speaker on the topic of code organization and best practices, which is exactly why we have her here. She lives in Austin with her partner, their son, and their dog. I'm jealous. I want a dog. Sometimes. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate you taking time out to join us.
Thank you for having me. It's a treat to get to talk to you again.
Yeah, it was. I've been following you for quite a while on Twitter, and it was great to actually get a chance to bump into and talk to you at CSS DevConf. So, and then here we are again doing more stuff. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. Oh, sorry. I'm excited to have you on because I was at Bazaarvoice for a little while before you. We never actually overlapped, but I'm actually really curious to kind of see, get the update, and kind of see how things are going there, see what y'all are working on. So I'm pretty excited about it.
You guys can talk gossip and all the crazy stuff that's going on there now. I'm sure there's plenty to say.
And what's especially funny is that Elise and I are in the same town, but I think we keep seeing each other at conferences.
Oh yeah, we've never hung out in Austin.
Like out of town.
Oh yeah, New Orleans.
Yeah, we hung out a lot. Like, wow, that was a long day at that bar.
I know. We went to Bacchanal for like 6 hours. It was pretty great.
It was pretty fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, it's great to have you on. Before we jump in the interview, a couple quick, just little news bits going on. Mm-hmm. If you don't know, CSS DevConf is announced, and submissions are being accepted. They are due by April 5th. And if you've never been to CSS DevConf, as we've already been talking about it, if you've never spoken there, I can tell you they treat their speakers incredibly well. I've been to some conferences where they're like, sure, come on and speak. Come on, buy your ticket, buy your airfare, buy your hotel, spend a bunch of money, come out here and speak. Yeah, it's like,
terrible.
I'm assuming it's the same this year. I don't want to speak for them, obviously, but they typically pay for, obviously, your ticket, the airfare to get you out there, hotel, and all that kind of great stuff. They treat you well. They don't throw much money in your pocket, but you get to go to a conference for free. It's awesome. So I've been the last 2 years, and going to be this upcoming year, doing one of the sessions afterwards. I always forget what the word is, not the session, but the workshop. Thank you. There's always some word that escapes me. We're doing a workshop, so I'll be there again. It's always a ton of fun. We have a great time. So if you're interested in speaking, they have topics ranging all over the place. If you don't have to be crazy code whiz, you don't have to get deep in the weeds of code. If you want more like an overview topic, if you want to do something just talking about Sass, they do tons of Sass. Get a submission in there. It's all voted on by your peers. So you don't even have to have some amazing credentials. Just put out a good idea, and so you go there and people can vote on stuff. It's completely double blind. They don't know who they're voting for and all that kind of stuff. So if you've never done a conference, this is a great one because if you get accepted, they pay to get out there even. So you just got to get the time off of work. and work oftentimes loves to send you out. So anyway, that's coming up. It's October 26th to 28th. The submission deadline is April 5th. So get those submissions in. I hope to see you there because it's going to be a lot of fun down in LA on a freaking cruise ship on a huge boat. It's going to be awesome. So we're looking forward to the fun. On top of that, April 4th is Camp Sass. So if you're out in the Atlanta area, or if you want to go out in the Atlanta area for April 4th, it's a one-day conference, single track. We're going to have a bunch of awesome speakers there.
I'm done missing that one. I'm sad. I know. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, it's always fun. I mean, with Hampton there, it's it's going to be crazy, so it'll be a good time. I'll be speaking about actually visual regression testing, which is what I'm doing at Sass DevConf as well. So it's all about Phantom CSS and all that good stuff. So it'll be fun. So we brought Rebecca Murphey here today to talk to her. So let's go ahead and do that. Rebecca, thanks for holding on as we get through all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first question that we always want to ask our guests when they come on is, what was the first time that you realized that you're interested in more than, I don't want to say just writing code, because obviously that's important, but getting into more the architectural portion of it and the organizational portion of it?
I think I got interested just because I knew I was doing it wrong, and I knew there had to be a better way. I just, I came to JavaScript. I had used other programming languages before, not a whole lot, and never professionally. For whatever reason, JavaScript was the first language that kind of spoke to me and grabbed my interest. But it also, I just felt like there had to be a better way than this. There had to be a better way to organize things. And it's funny because in my personal life, oh my gosh, there are clothes on the floor in the bedroom, and the bed's not made, and there's a beer bottle from last night sitting on my desk. My life is a disaster, but my
don't say that. That's not true.
As I look around my desk for bottles.
No, my life is not a disaster. My life is not an organized life. Just ask my partner; she will vouch for this. But my being able to organize my code, being able to organize my computer, being able to organize my photos, those sorts of things have always been really important to me because organization is kind of mandatory in order to be able to revisit a thing. And that I just found myself over and over in experiences of revisiting either my own code or other code that other people had written in the past, and here I am trying to figure it out. And without any sense of organization, it was somewhere between hard and impossible to make heads or tails of what was going on without reading all of it. So it was really, I got interested in this just because I felt like there had to be a better way, I think.
What was the first time you got a chance to start doing that? Because oftentimes you're just stuck with what you're given. Was it a new position, or you just kind of took it upon yourself?
Yeah, so I had kind of a weird introduction to this thing that I do. I worked in an agency and I got to work on a kind of surprising number of greenfield things, and I did them all kind of badly. But then I left, and that was someone else's problem. I went on and worked at a startup. Again, I took some learnings from my last job, but did things slightly better, but really still not so great. And then the startup folded. I was left unemployed for, kind of suddenly. And I don't even know how. I look back on this and I'm like, people think I can do what? Okay. Because I just kind of got this reputation in the community as being someone who was thinking and talking about these things. And so I was working for myself for the time after I lost my job at the startup. I worked for myself for nearly 3 years. And so I kind of carved out an identity as I am the person who thinks about these things. I'm not the person who thinks about these by any stretch of the imagination, but I was kind of early on talking about the jQuery way of plugins and all of that is not the way forward. That is not how we're going to build rich applications. And I was also really lucky to get to meet pretty early in my career, some really smart people in the JavaScript space, including the person who was the what was his, I don't know what his title was. He was a big deal in Dojo, which was a toolkit that really took a very different approach than jQuery did, and was the first thing that taught me that you could think really, really differently about organizing your code. And so I was really lucky to have a lot of opportunities early on that kind of steered me toward this. And so by the time I re-entered the workforce, like the workforce where someone else pays you a check every month or whatever, I kind of established myself as this, and those were the kinds of jobs that I was going after. So
is that kind of how you ended up at Bazaarvoice and kind of what they were looking for you to do? And
yeah, so I ended up at Bazaarvoice thanks to my friend Alex Sexton, who I had been following along with what he was doing at Bazaarvoice, and he had even talked to me a lot about the product that he was building at Bazaarvoice and the tools and decisions that he was making. And so it was a product that I was slightly familiar with even before I joined the team and joined the company.
So just to interrupt super quick about Bazaarvoice, for those of you, because we know, but
right.
For
I was going to ask the same question.
One listening who is not familiar, Bazaarvoice does ratings and reviews for online shopping. So if you are on Best Buy or basically any site that's not Amazon, Walmart, any of those big ones, and you're looking at product reviews, the 5-star ratings, that's usually, probably, I think in every case except for Amazon, that's Bazaarvoice software. Yeah. So when I was there, I was kind of doing the design side of it. Rebecca obviously working on the dev side. And you can talk a little bit more about the JavaScript stuff y'all were doing. I didn't mean to derail that.
No, that's a really.
Nobody knows what Bazaarvoice is. So.
Which is a weird thing because we are on. I mean, I think we did in December. We did something like 728 million uniques. It's a sizable portion of the world.
Yeah.
It's a major part of almost every consumer product page on most major retailers. So you see
it's all white labeled then, right? So you don't actually see the name anywhere.
Yeah. Which is back to the Rebecca, the JavaScript stuff. Part of I think the interesting problem there was serving up all this third-party stuff quickly into a client's site without making it like feel or look or act any different than what the customer is expecting on that client's
right. Yeah, oh my gosh, I can do like a 5-hour-long podcast about the challenges of third-party application development. But to answer your original question, like definitely that was what Bazaarvoice hired me for. And it was, this is not a Bazaarvoice plug, but I'll just say it. When I was interviewing with various companies around the time that I was looking for a new role, in a full-time role, a lot of other companies were just like, yeah, we want to make you be a cog in the wheel. Like, we found your resume, and sure, I have no idea who you are or what value you're going to add. And Bazaarvoice is really hiring me to provide this specific value, to come in. And the specific product was a product that had been worked on over a period of months. There was a deadline. A lot of things happen during deadlines that aren't always the most awesome things. And I was kind of brought in to bring a little bit of sanity and quality to that product and to the code base, not to the product, but to the code base. Good people do bad things under pressure, and
do that in a plaque or something.
Yeah, good people do bad things, and they weren't bad. They were just like not good. And so that was kind of my initial role at Bazaarvoice, was to try and help clean up that code base and make it a little bit more sane now that the rush was over.
Yeah, it seems like that's kind of what a lot of us are trying to get to, is that getting to that role in that position where you're getting hired on because of those talents, because of those skills you have, rather than we've got lots of tickets and we need people to just do the work.
Well, especially in an architectural type of role, that's the thing that you care about so much. It's very, very frustrating, I think, to be in a job where you're like, oh, I know that this could be better, and oh, I want to go do this architecture stuff, but you're having to kind of like fight for every minute and every hour that you get to work on that stuff. And so it's really, really cool to be in a role, Rebecca, like you were saying, like this is my job to actually come in and do this organizational architectural part.
Well, and the cool thing was that we saw a real benefit from doing good pull request reviews and saying like, yeah, this works, but there's code over here that already does the same thing, and so let's figure out how we can reuse that. Like, we saw actual benefits of that over time. It took a long time for that to pay off, but I think very clearly we saw benefits of that. And now, like, I'm not on that team anymore, but I kind of established this. I became the lead of that team after there were some transitions. I became the lead of that team, was the lead of that team for about a year and a half. And I really tried to instill a culture that values good code, that doesn't just value getting it done. And I watch the pull request, and it like gives me such warm fuzzies to see that those conversations are still happening. And I think, like I said, it's not just, we don't just do this to make developers feel good, although there's a whole lot of value to making developers feel good, because it turns out that finding new ones is pretty expensive. So we don't just do it to make developers feel good, we actually see tangible improvements in the quality of the product that we're delivering when we are more thoughtful about it.
Nice. So how long have you been at Bazaarvoice? You've been there for a number of years then, right?
Just 2 years, actually.
Okay,
I just very recently rotated off that team to kind of take a bigger picture view. So that was a product, the display portion of the new ratings and reviews product. There's also an old ratings and reviews product, and there's another new ratings and reviews product. Anyway, this was the display portion of a very specific product, so not display for all of Bazaarvoice, but just for that specific product. Now I'm in a role where I'm actually trying to take the lessons that we learned on that product and make them more universally available. So, a thing that every application, every consumer-facing application that we make at Bazaarvoice needs a certain set of things. It's just guaranteed. There's no question about it. And so I'm looking at how we can share those things, and that in the JavaScript land is way harder than it should be, especially when you have a bunch of different things that have been built in a bunch of different eras by a bunch of different people. That's what I'm doing now. Yeah.
So I kind of want to start kind of at the beginning of this whole process. I'm trying to remember if I even said this or thought this, but a lot of us coming from Frontend Architect, again, we're the jQuery jockeys, and our site JavaScript was basically, here's a script file, and every time we want to do something, we find the selector and we do a click handler or whatever we're going to put on it, and then we do all of our logic right inside of that, and we finish it up, and then every time we need to do something new, we just add on to this file that gets ridiculous. So that's where a lot of us come from. I mean, I know speaking for myself, but and I know other front-end devs, it's kind of what you end up, the spaghetti mess you work with. Yeah, thank you, Elise. But I'm not alone. I'm like, hopefully this is true. So what I want to do is kind of start the beginning. Like we're going to be talking about architecture and coming into a project. That the big goal that I have with front-end architecture is to get people with our skill sets, whether it's JavaScript or CSS or just build processes and just how we get stuff to that front end, get those people involved in the planning process of a site earlier. So we can actually talk about build tools. We can actually talk about versioning. We can talk about like naming conventions and markup and those kind of things. So in the part of JavaScript, what are those conversations we need to have? We're sitting down with a client. We're building XYZ site, whether it's an application or just a website. Like we're working on redhat.com right now. And it's not a huge JavaScript app, but there is a lot of JavaScript and functionality stuff going on. So what are those conversations we need to have when starting a project of those kind of scopes?
So there's a few kind of different categories that come to mind about what needs to be in that conversation. I don't know if it's a conversation you need to have with a client or if it's a conversation you need to have with your team. Like, it all depends. Like, I don't have a client, so I don't have a good. And it's been a while since I worked in a world where there were clients, and so depends on your definition of client, I guess. Anyway, conversations that I think are really important to have up front, and like shockingly early. It is amazing how much these conversations shape decisions that you make later, and if you didn't have these conversations, you're in a world of hurt. So what I'm talking about, I'm going to kind of preface this by saying what I'm talking about is client-side web applications. So applications where there is some real and true interaction happening in the browser, possibly as much as the whole page is changing entirely client-side, or maybe just a little part of it, but still, you have some like substantial interaction happening in the browser. If you don't have a substantial interaction happening in the browser, like the first question to ask is, why do we need a client-side solution at all? So that's I kind of want to bring that up first and foremost. Is I had someone here at work come over to me a few weeks ago and say, like, we're about to build this new internal tool for like displaying API keys and interacting with them and adding and deleting them and whatever. And like, should I use Ember? Should I use Angular? Should I, like, what should I use? And I was like, how about none of the above? How about, like, you know how to write a server-side Java app? And that's probably about all you need for this. Like, yeah, you'll have some refreshes, but what's the big deal? Like, this is not neat. You're not making Gmail here. You're making like a glorified CRUD app. Not even a glorified CRUD app. You're making a CRUD app. Like, that doesn't need to be. If you don't already know Angular, Ember, React, like.
But writing in Java is so boring.
I know that writing is. Well, then write a server-side Node app if you really want to write in JavaScript. But like, there's just, you know, doing stuff client-side brings so many challenges that I don't. Just especially when you're developing an internal tool that no one's really giving you any time to build, you just kind of have to get it done. Like, this may not be the time to.
Yeah,
take
there's.
On the thing.
I think a fine line between, you're talking about keeping developers happy, you know, between doing something in a cool new technology or getting to try something new and do something interesting versus the dangers of over-engineering. Like, do you really need to do that? Is it really important? And you know, I think we've had a lot of CSS and Sass people on the show, and we've kind of, it's come up, like, you don't have to do it that way. Like, just because you have all these tools available to you doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best option.
Yeah, and like, fun is fun, and if that's going to be fun for you, then cool. But if you're going to take a month to deliver something that you could have delivered in 2 hours, like, I don't know. I'm lazy. I've got a kid now, and I'm old, so I'm like, I'll take the 2-hour option. Anyway.
Yeah. So the first thing is framework, or
do I need to do this at all?
Not even use JavaScript.
Yeah. Like, there are. I just want to acknowledge that there are times when a server-generated app with some jQuery sprinkled on top is totally the right answer, and you don't need to feel bad about it. It's okay. So let's assume that we're not talking about one of those, though, right? Let's assume that we are talking about something that's more substantial and where you're going to benefit from some front-end presence. Then the conversations that I want to have at that point kind of fall into two categories that are somewhat overlapping. Number one is, what is my deployment strategy going to be for this? When I need to fix a bug, how am I going to guarantee that that bug fix gets out into the world without having to say, like, just reset your cache? Like, we can't tell people in the real world to reset their cache, right? Like, in the real world, their cache is their cache is their cache until, like, their computer gets full. And so what is the deployment strategy for this? How am I going to, when I need to make a fix, how am I going to get it out in the world at the appropriate speed? And Alex Sexton has a great article about this called Deploying JavaScript Applications that talks about some techniques that you can use for that. But this is a like surprisingly important conversation to have up front, because it may affect how you make some other fundamental decisions. But just figuring out when I need to get new code out in the world, like, literally, how will I do that? And there's strategies such as using a scout file, which is a small JavaScript file that has a very short TTL that will load versioned resources that have a very long TTL. And so you can put a new Scout file out in the world, because as a short TTL, within 10 minutes, everyone in the world has it, and that new Scout file knows to point to version 124 instead of version 123. And so thinking about stuff like that up front really will inform other decisions you make. So the next conversation that kind of is wrapped up in that conversation is, what will be our process for generating the resources that need to exist in the world with the production application? So you might be, with Sass, for example, you're managing a whole bunch of files that ultimately get compiled into one file. You can do that with, I don't know. I literally don't know. I assume you type Sass something and it just happens.
That's it. That's nailed it.
Yeah, right?
You completely described the entire, all the complexity of...
Yes, just type Sass something and it happens. Or like maybe grunt Sass, I don't know.
Now you're making it real complicated.
Yeah. Gulp, broccoli. No, like these are things that I know I can go read this on the internet, and so it is not in my brain. Yeah, so like that's what you do for your Sass. How do you make that part of a more holistic build process? Because you also have to probably build your JavaScript as well, and you may have some interesting interactions between your JavaScript and your CSS, and you need some tool that kind of manages those interactions. For example, putting a version in your selectors, in your Sass selectors, like in some wrapper that you have. You want to stick a version in it so that you avoid some conflicts with older things. So what's the tooling that you're going to use around that? Is it going to be Grunt? Is it going to be Gulp? Is it going to be Maven and then I'm sorry? Is it going to be like, oh my god, I'm working on a project right now and like I type Maven clean install and then go eat lunch. And I don't know how people live in that world. So what kind of tools are you going to use? And please have tools. Like, don't do things by hand. Like, we know what we are going to need to automate, and it's worth automating it up front, because the longer you don't, the harder it is to do. And so if you up front create automation around like moving files to a deployment directory or like really simple things like that, then adding more automation later becomes easy. If you don't set up that automation at first, adding it later is really painful. And so I'll even kind of tangent here, but I saw a pull request the other day that was like, in order to accomplish this task, step 1, do this, step 2, and I was like, no.
Stop that.
No, we are not writing this in words. We have computers. And so let's write this in computer and get the computer to do this for us in the future.
I saw a great tweet a couple of days ago that's perfect on this. Is someone saw an error message that like usernames cannot end with a space. And their comment was like, so you had enough time to write this error message, but not enough time to write a trim function on the input. That's exactly what that is.
Right.
I had for a very long time this idea to do a like UX for developers talk, and I kind of did a little bit of that at Camp Sass last year, but that was really kind of the stuff that it was in my head. Like, you may not be thinking about UX or like design when you're a dev, kind of like thinking about what that's going to be like, but those are the kind of things like, oh, you can make it so that you can enter your zip and it fills in like the city state and all that stuff. You can make it so that your usernames or passwords can take all that stuff. Like, those are dev things that are UX related. Sorry, just tangent.
Well, no, like that actually, that's not where I thought you were going to go with that. But where I was thinking, like when you said UX for developers, this goes like very well to one of my next points. Thanks, Elise.
Nice segue. It's perfect.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here for.
So you're talking about teaching developers about the UX of an application for its users. I think a really interesting thing to talk about up front when you're starting something new is, what is the UX of the development experience?
Yeah, that's huge and a really good point.
So again, like we have this project right now where the UI development was happening in like one directory and the backend development's happening in another directory. And when you were working on the UI, you were looking at like fake content that wasn't actually generated from the back end. It was just like You load it up in
That's
index.
designer's worst nightmare.
Right?
I have no idea if this is how it's going to work or not.
How it's actually going to work. So, and they're out of sync and, everything. And so I took some time to make a preview server that actually did talk to the back end so that, and this was a very new project, so it's not shocking that this didn't exist yet, but it was a really important thing. But yeah, so I made a preview server that used the actual back end, and now you could have a more authentic experience and honestly feel pain when the back end was broken so that you kind of understood better how those pieces actually work together and might identify ways that it could fail that you would never identify if you were dealing with like hard-coded HTML that you're writing your...
In an actual database instead of just a file, you're going to feel the pain of like of a bad query or like that's way too much on the page or we're swapping too many things out or something like that. Working in real-world situations.
Yeah, and so let's see, what have I said? Like, do you need JavaScript at all? What is your deployment story? What is your kind of build story? What is your tool for automation? I kind of jumped the gun talking about developer experience, but I think that's super important, like the developer ergonomics of working on this project. But then another thing in the JavaScript land that's super important is what is your module system going to be? I don't care if you're using React or Angular. I don't care. What is your modular system going to be? Angular actually kind of dictates this to you, but Backbone and others do not. What is your module system going to be? Are you going to use AMD, which is the asynchronous module definition that feels kind of clunky but has some nice benefits and was definitely my tool of choice a couple years ago? Or are you going to use CommonJS modules, which a couple of years ago, if you used those, you were insane. And now there's really good tooling around them, and I'm kind of coming around to we should be using CommonJS modules.
So just some background on those, because I know those terms get tossed around a lot in JavaScript, and for people coming from the front end, you're like, okay, sure. But what are those, and why do we need them? I think it's a really good question.
Yeah. So backing up, just what is a module, right? And like honestly, a module is whatever you want it to be. If you want to write your entire application in one module, like no one will stop you. But a module is a way. I hope some, but they might not. Like there's no JavaScript police that are going to come along and say you can't do that. So hopefully someone will stop you, but no one's going to stop you. But really, modules give you the ability to create small units of functionality, and so a module will export either a function or an object. Sometimes I guess a module could just export a value like 2, but that seems like that's a more rare case. But you might have a module that says, what version of IE am I running in right now? And then it really would, like its return value would be 8. And
hopefully not.
Hopefully not, but could happen. So you could have a module that did that, or you could have a module that was for URL parsing, let's say, which is a thing that we have to do a lot in our application. So given a URL, I need to parse out the Bazaarvoice specific query parameters that are in it. So you could have a module whose job it was to expose a function that does that.
So everything like kind of single purpose, or at least that's the kind of idea. Do one thing well.
Yeah.
And when you do that functionality, so kind of analogous to like how we have Sass partials and how we kind of keep a kind of segregated bit of code that works on one thing. Ish, or it's the best analogy I can make with it. With Sass.
Yeah, it's hard to make an analogy to Sass or CSS.
Or pulling in functions, or pulling in like a set of mixins or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a module can be more than that. A module can be kind of a collection of related functionality as well, and so you could have a URL parser module that exposes 6 different methods. Or like there's lots of different things that a module can be, but a module ultimately is sort of encapsulating a set of related functionality where that like list of things is 1 or more, has a size of 1 or more. So it's for exposing a set of related functionality. So the AMD module style is explicitly asynchronous. So you say define, parentheses, array, a list of your dependencies, and then a function that executes when all of those dependencies have been resolved. And it passes those dependencies in as arguments to that function. So you could say define, and then square brackets, jQuery underscore, close square brackets, comma, function, $, underscore, and now you can use jQuery as dollar and underscore as the underscore inside of that function. And you can return things from that function, whatever. So the AMD is the asynchronous module definition, and it is explicitly asynchronous. CommonJS is way simpler. It's like var $ equals jQuery, or equals require jQuery, and var underscore equals require underscore. Well, this is simple. Really easy to understand, right? It's really easy to understand, but the problem is that on the web, those dependencies could be resolved asynchronously. But the code that you just wrote is synchronous. Like it expects that, like if on line 1 you say var $ equals require jQuery, and on line 2 you say var underscore equals require underscore, and on line 3 you say like get me an, well, like line 1 hasn't actually resolved yet, but here you are on line 3. What, like, I don't even, and so that was kind of the problem with AMD, is it worked really well for Node and for server side, because they could do their dependency resolution effectively synchronously. In the browser, you can't do your dependency resolution synchronously. So, long story. All that to get to.
I'm learning so much, though. This is great.
This is good.
All that to get to, and I'm sitting here thinking, like, what am I saying that's not true? What am I saying that's not true? All of that is to get to the fact that there are tools that are built for these module systems. Require.js is built for the AMD module system. Webpack is built to work with both AMD and CommonJS. And I think Browserify, anything I say right now I'm making up. I don't know. I know they deal with CommonJS, but they may also deal with AMD. I don't know. I can't remember.
I'm sure we'll get tweets.
Yes, this is why we have the internet, is to answer these questions. So to solve this is like a whole tangent here. Sorry. To solve the problem of CommonJS being like looking synchronous but needs to function asynchronously, Webpack, which is my new favorite thing, will make you a build given like here's a bunch of CommonJS modules, figure it out. It will actually take those synchronous requires, turn them into asynchronous requires in the build code, and like you don't even have to care. It doesn't matter. So anyway, all of that is to say this is a really important decision to make up front, and the choice you make really will affect the ecosystem that you can pull from. Like, if you choose CommonJS, then every module in NPM is written using not every probably, but like most every module in CommonJS and Node is written in CommonJS, and so you get access to all of that. You can technically get access to it in Require and AMD land as well, but it's more complicated. So it's a big decision to make right now, and my current weak recommendation is CommonJS with Webpack.
So it's kind of like that Gulp versus Grunt decision, and what's out there in the community and what's been built, and those kind of things is one of the big differences. Yeah,
but like it's in some ways it's an even harder. I find it an even hard. I don't feel like Gulp, Grunt. Just pick one. They all have the basic things you need, right? Like they all have.
But if you have
Sass.
one thing you have to have, whether it's some kind of like concatenation tool or some kind of style guide generator or something like that, you probably want to make sure it meets those requirements at least.
Yeah, or like look at grunts and fork it and make it your own for Gulp and release it, and everyone's happy. You know, I don't think that either of them are so fundamentally different that you can't port stuff from one to the other. So I don't know. I don't have a horse in that race. I think this. switching between them would suck. Switching between module systems would really, really suck. And you definitely, it's one of those decisions that sets your course in a certain way once you make it.
Nice. Okay, so make those decisions, get those modules in, write things in small, tiny little bits of functionality. Now this might be like total noob question, but I was just kind of being curious about how this process works. When you require jQuery or whatever the case is that file, does it require that file is already loaded into the browser and it just basically pulls it into that function space, or does it actually go in and grabbing those files? Does it actually build your JavaScript stack or whatever you have?
So it depends. That's a complicated question. So let's say in our application we have a module that requires jQuery. It just so happens that in the built application, further up in the application, we already loaded jQuery. We defined it earlier, and so it's loaded. It's in memory basically, and this module that's asking for it just gets it from memory, just gets a pointer to it in memory. However, let's say that we didn't have it somewhere else in our application, and so we say require jQuery, and it's like, I don't have that in memory. It's going to need to look to some configuration information about where to load jQuery from, and it's going to have to go get it from like the internet, and so that's going to require a request, and that's the asynchronous nature of it. Yeah.
So the idea is that you can have a large system, but if a page only requires a couple different modules to function, it only has to actually load those into, pull those in.
Yeah, I mean, what you would tend to do in a situation where you had a page that only needed a couple of things is to do a build of your application just for that page. So that build would just have the 3 things you need. A build for another page might have 100 things. And these are the
architectural decisions.
Yeah, these are how do you break up your code, and is it worth having a 100K file for the big page and a 30K file for the small page, but really 15 of those K are the same? What have we really gained by splitting it up? What have we really gained by splitting it up?
It would have been better if the file was just cached and those kind of things. So.
Right, and learning a lot about how TCP works. That has been a big thing that I have actually had to understand better than I ever did before as part of this job. Like how understanding it's really not just about file size. It's about the number of connections that you make and the order in which you make them. And you don't want to request, you want to request progressively larger files. You don't want to request a 100K file and then a 15K file. It's better to request a 15K file and then a 45K file, and then and use each of the windows that you have in order to pull down your content. So this gets into kind of engineering a solution more than just writing code.
Outside of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we have the same kind of questions with CSS of this page doesn't use our entire library of CSS, but we could load it and then it's already loaded for the next page that comes up. I think most conventions, most people kind of err towards let's just load it all up and then we know it's cached. But when you have an application where you're on one page for an extended period of time, it's one application. I mean, we're usually bouncing around from page to page, and more like kind of brochure or marketing site. But yeah, if you're on one page, you're on Gmail. You're on there for a long time before you hop off into some other page. You might need some other JavaScript loaded. So I can see that being a big difference.
Well, and the thing that we do at Bazaarvoice is we actually split our app up into the display portion and the submission portion. And so we load the display portion up front, but then we don't load the submission portion until a user takes some action that suggests they will need it. And so that's another strategy that you can use, is to lazy load content. So it's not in the, it's not blocking rendering, but you load it so that it's there when you need it, but no sooner. And Alex,
the mouse gets close to that button, you're like, oh, I think you're going for it.
Yeah. So Alex talks about this a ton in his post deploying JavaScript applications. So highly recommend.
Very nice. So now we've brought all these modules in. We've brought them in from AMD or what was the other one again? AMD or Require?
CommonJS.
CommonJS, thank you. Require is the AMD one, right? So many names. All right. So we've brought everything in. Now, one of the things we kind of talked about before was then we have all these small, tiny pieces of functionality. How do they communicate? How do we make sure that states are updated, that one thing does one thing and the other thing knows about it and all of that? But what are some of the strategies for that?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic to me, and it is really what got me thinking. This was one of the first questions I was trying to answer when I started to think, like, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And there's a lot of different strategies that we can take. One is to use a global message bus, like have basically an event emitter that's like window.myapp, and we can trigger events on it, and then you have other pieces of code that are listening for events to be triggered on it. It's very much a fire and forget kind of approach, because you don't know who's listening on the other end. You don't know when you trigger.
That sounded really ominous.
It is, though, and it is ominous because there's a few problems with that approach. One is that keeping track of the kind of dictionary of events that are getting published becomes impossible. And so you could have, like, one piece of code is triggering a click on Lightbox event, and then some other piece of code triggers a click on Lightbox event because it didn't know about that first click on Lightbox event and that it even existed, and now you're having weird side effects that you didn't expect. So that it is a strategy. It's not like my favorite one, but it's probably the most naive thing that you can do is use and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like the simplest thing you could do that might work. Is have some sort of global message bus that you're passing messages through by triggering them, and then someone else is listening to them. And that is also basically the pub-sub model. It's effectively what it is. You can also take a much more restrictive approach where, let's say you have a model and a view, and make sure that the model knows about the view and the view knows about the model, but neither of them know anything about the world outside of them. And so they can talk directly to each other by calling methods directly on each other because you've given each of them a handle on the other one. So that is a really restrictive approach to it.
Very like explicit, so like every single one has to be done explicitly if you want something new. Yeah.
And that works really well in like the that mostly works really well. Like really, I think you want those connections to be explicit when they are kind of, I wouldn't even call them implicit. Like implicit is wrong too. When they are the fire and forget approach, you really don't know the consequences of what you're doing, and bad things might happen. And so another thing that you can do is have kind of a localized message bus. So in our application, we have a component, which is basically a controller for all of the models and views inside of the component. So the component is the list of reviews, let's say, but that's actually made up of several different models and views. And so models and views can send a message up to their component, and then other things can listen in there. And so you restrict the communication to a component, and then you also have mechanisms for communication between components, but a model in component A can't talk directly to a model in component B. We have the component is kind of the broker of the messages. So yeah, these are super interesting questions. And then there's also the explicit data binding, like you have in Ember, where you actually say in your template essentially, like, this is this, and when it changes, I expect this to update. And Ember handles all of that under the hood for you, and they do that in some somewhat clever ways of just kind of every turn of the event loop looking at what has changed and then updating everything. React does it even more interestingly by maintaining a virtual DOM, and so they still have event binding, but the event binding is kind of on the virtual DOM, not on the actual DOM. And so they change the virtual DOM, and then at the turn of the event loop, they say, what is different about the DOM? And then stick the new DOM to the page using just the pieces that have changed.
Yeah, just that little diff of what's changed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So those are, yeah, there's a lot of different strategies. We in the world we're working with just a backbone app because we don't want to pay the cost of larger framework, and so we have to solve a lot of these problems on our own rather than having them do it for us.
Cool. Well, nice. Well, hey, I want to wrap this up because I know you guys are given lots of time, and I know I need to get lunch at some point. Someone doing this at lunchtime. Like, right. I love a good long interview. But it's like, all right, get lunch, and then we actually have a meetup tonight, so it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yes.
What I want to wrap up with is we've talked a lot about like, especially approaching that larger application build and some of the things you have to consider, like what are the tools? We talked about frameworks, and we've talked about module loaders and different ways of communication. For people that aren't diving in that direction, that are still doing that jQuery site where I need to build some tabs and an accordion, and I need to just have some of the basic functionality. Do you have any advice for them as they start to build that out, so they just don't have this this huge 1,000-line
right.
file where everything's just a explicit binding?
I might still, especially, I haven't played with React yet, so I'm kind of making up what I'm about to say, but I might still look at something like React and see if it might provide you just some encapsulation, really, more than anything, so that the code that you're writing is more localized to so you don't end up with a case where you're using some code that's like for your tab stuff, but also for your other stuff, and also for your other stuff. I would also say, like, even if you think that you are writing something extremely simple, script tags are not dependency management. Script tags are not how you're going to manage even the littlest bit of complexity. I tried, I don't know, a few months ago to start working on an app that I was like, oh, this is so simple, I'm just going to use script tags. And like, I rapidly just wanted to stab myself. Because I really missed the ability to just express my dependencies in a way that makes sense to me. So I would say, even if you think that what you're doing is simple, take a day, get your bearings with Webpack. It's pretty easy to do basic stuff with it. If you've already got Grunt or something cool, like, use something to handle. Use something that gives you permission to have lots of small files, because a script tag does not give you permission to have lots of small files. Like, you can't have lots of script tags. You're going to need some some strategy. If you manage things just with script tags, then either everything has to end up in one file, or you have lots of script tags. And we can't have lots of script tags, so everything has to end up in one file. So now you can either author all in one file, which is terrible, or you can author in lots of small files. Now you need a system to put those small files together. Well, you could just concatenate them, but how do you make, like, this? Like, getting the order right is impossible eventually. And so now you need a module loader. Like, now you need a system to actually load those in the right order for you. So you don't need to think about it. And so I'd say, like, don't end up there. Like, just go from the start with, if you think you're going to write more than 100 lines of JavaScript, then figure out a module system for it. I would also, like, look at Backbone, look at React, look at something that will help you encapsulate the code that you're writing into logical pieces, that will force you to encapsulate the code you're writing into module pieces. So when you're, like, adding something to your tabs view, you have to really, like, if the thing that you're adding isn't about tabs, that should be, like, alarm bells should go off in your head. Like, I'm adding something to the tabs view that isn't about tabs, I should stop and figure out where this actually goes. So, like, just take the plunge of trying to sort that out, because I think that it pays a lot of dividends, and it's a really hard thing to do later. If you can get yourself set up well in the beginning, you can make it better later. And that's a really important thing, and a thing that I have learned on the project that I work on, which is probably now coming up on 30,000 lines of code, and probably, I don't know, 100 modules or something like that. I don't have to care. I don't have to care, but like any one module can be crappy, and that's okay. We can come back and fix that one module later. But if the system is crappy, we can never come back and fix that one module because there is no one module. And so that
I think you just summed up front-end architecture.
Yeah.
It's so hard to fix the entire system, but if you have a good system and one little piece is broken, it's not a big deal.
You can fix it. Or ignore it. Equally valid.
and the thing is, for most of us that write any of this front-end JavaScript, or most of us being front-enders that come into this, is it's always just all right, go start building, and different people just start writing their jQuery bits, and there's no sense of what that architecture is. It's not broken into modules. It is just one big crappy system that sure it gets the job done. At the end of the day, the CSS displays and the JavaScript clicks work. But with those systems, we always find ourselves like everything we do, every new story just adds more complexity and more bloat and more cruft to the project that pretty much just makes it even more impossible to refactor and clean up and make right. So those module approaches are huge.
And I will promise you that if your company doesn't want you to think about these things, there are companies that do want you to think about these things. We would never dream of starting a project without thinking these things through. And now our challenge is how to make it so we don't have to think so hard every time. Like, how do we standardize? How do we share? How do we... all those things. But we would never... I can't even conceive of starting any sort of real user-facing product without these pieces in place. It's a non-starter.
Yeah, and partially it's the difference that I come from an agency world where we have a client, and the client is only willing to pay for whatever we can sell them to pay for. So it even becomes a sales issue at that point of this is something we want to do and we find valuable, and we have to convince them that it's worth convincing the client to pay for it, even though it's something that we just haven't done in the past. It's this whole chicken or egg thing of like, well, we never did it that way before. We always just brought the front-end developer in after everything else is done, and it worked just fine. It worked just fine in air quotes.
Right.
And so why should we change now? And
well, I think the reason for an agency to change is because once you have processes, they become repeatable. And once they become repeatable, you don't have to do this over and over again. You can have a robust, well-organized application, but you just run a yeoman generator, and like now you have one. Now it's there. Once you make these choices, you can just scaffold this application just much like you scaffold a Rails application. Like you can build your own starter kit or use one of the existing starter kits for that matter, and not have to make so many decisions and have tests built in and have all these things. But that's the benefit in an agency model, is building some practice that you can reuse that is actually effective and doesn't require starting from scratch every single time.
Yeah. That's certainly what we're shooting for, and a lot of the work, especially on the front end, is trying to standardize those practices, trying to figure out like which of the ways are working well, how to get those into some kind of repeatable patterns, yeoman generators. And it's kind of interesting looking at the JavaScript realm, because I think there has been architecturally, I think there's been a lot more maturity in that field, just because it's been getting much larger for a number of years, so that's already kind of been sold, especially for an application. But for agencies, we're doing a brochure site. Sure, it's large, but well, we don't need to do that. We'll just do that later. It's still something that we're trying to sell and trying to fight to get to that point where we can be involved in that process. We want build tools. We want to have a conversation about the build tools. If you bring us in after everything's done, we don't have a chance to do that.
Right. And I I would be so much less productive without all of these pieces in place from the beginning. It would slow me down trying to, I wouldn't be in a good position to come do this stuff later.
Yeah.
But there's a reason why I don't have that job. Because I am a big believer of like, go where you are wanted and needed. And so here I am.
Yeah, it's a balance. I mean, we have an opportunity to make a change, to, to propose to the sales team, to really to put together, like, we need to have good examples. We need to, like, equip them so they can sell these things as well. And so, yeah, it's a fun challenge, and hopefully, and part of the reason for this talk, part of the reason for, or for the talk I did, part of the reason for this podcast, part of the reason for me writing a book about this is that, like, these are important things that need to be moved forward in industry to change the way that, especially agencies and the way that we're building things, just has got to change to catch up with what you're able to do when you're, when you're in a company that cares about the product they're building because they have to eat it. They can't make those short-term decisions of like, well, it's cheaper if we just go build it as fast as you can and then be done. It's right. Like, well, no, it's really expensive because then we have to maintain it and work on it and all those sorts of things. So, awesome. I think it's really neat to see this kind of other side of the coin. JavaScript realm of something that's just a lot more mature, and kind of be encouraged that there is a space that already gets this, and it's kind of up to us to convince the rest of the space that, hey, you see what they're doing? We can do the exact same thing with our CSS and our HTML and our JavaScript while we're at it. And come up with a system that's going to be so much more efficient. It takes a little bit of time to set up, and it'll take even less time as we start to hone that process. But the gains that we get afterwards are just incredible. So thank you very much for enlightening us. We now know way more about modules than we did coming into this, which I'm excited about because I'm like, okay, what can I start doing now? Because we're at a point we've only written like a tiny bit of jQuery for what we're doing. So I think we might be able to get into that and just make sure we have some kind of sanity in that process. So thank you very much. Elise, I know you had a little tidbit to wrap this up with, or a little news.
I do. For those of you who have been following along with the SassConf announcements, a little sneak tweet on Twitter the other day, but we should be announcing CFP mentor team hopefully early next week. So for those of you who are not sure what you want to submit, or even not sure if you want to submit or how to submit or what to talk about, if you have already submitted and you want to get some feedback, we have a whole team of people who are going to be available for office hours and for chats and a chat channel, just for you to kind of bounce ideas off of and ask questions to, and kind of get your proposal figured out. So we'll have lots of information on that hopefully early next week. I'm just waiting on a couple of details to wrap that up and announce it for y'all. So keep your eyes peeled on the Twitters for that news.
Awesome, cool. And then next week on Sass Bites, I've got a couple of feelers out for a guest for next week. But if that doesn't come about, I did a visual regression demo actually just last month at PDX Sass. That I didn't get a chance to record. A lot of people had questions about it. So if I don't have anyone coming on, I should be diving into that next week. So diving into Phantom CSS, showing how visual regression works and how you can get it into your workflow in a scalable manner. I think that's one of the cool things about some of the stuff I'm going to show is, sure, you can use it and build it, but then how do you get it into a large application with lots of components, lots of pieces, in a way, in large teams, in ways that's going to scale. So that'll be coming up next week. Unless another guest comes up, then they'll have that. But yeah, watch the Twitters as well. We'll have that information coming up. So Rebecca Murphey, awesome to get a chance to talk to you again. Are you going to be at CSS Dev Conf this next year?
I am not going to be at CSS Dev Conf. I had a blast last year, and I want to echo what you said. They do such a good job with their speakers that, yeah, I highly recommend.
Well, I need to figure out where you plan on speaking and throw some CFPs that direction as well. So, check out Cascadia.js. That is one that I don't know if I'll be speaking there, but I'm going to try to attend, and it looks pretty cool.
That's on my list to submit to.
I desperately want to be there. Because it's seriously in my hometown. It's like the back door of my hometown. And it's just like timing-wise, I'm like, there's so much going on that month. But it's like home. I could just go, hang out with my parents
Go
for
be
the
home.
weekend.
Right.
So
right.
yeah, that should be really cool. It's a beautiful area. I'm jealous of everyone that gets to go out there because it's the resort out like at the end of a spit of water in the bay.
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous location and right next to a really awesome town. So yeah, if you're not, there's a little plug for Cascade JS. I've been following them, so that should be a lot of fun. They've moved up and down. I think they've been in Portland and Seattle and maybe up in Blaine up near Bellingham, and so it'll be that'll be a great one. It'll be coming up like June-ish, I think. June something?
June or July, and also it's called Cascadia JS, but don't be fooled. Like it is really a full-on web development conference.
Yeah, I think they've actually even partnered. There's a Cascadia CSS. I think they've kind of merged together. They just kept the name of the JS portion of it. So more great stuff to do. So thanks everyone for watching today. For the Catch This Show later. I had a bunch of viewers stick around. It's always fun to see you guys watching live. So thanks again. We'll see you next week. Once again, Rebecca, awesome to get a chance to talk. Hopefully we get a chance to do it again. I'm sure there's tons more that we could dig out of the awesome brain of yours. And I'm sure once I dive into modules, I'll probably be coming back to ask you about more stuff. So
yes, very good.
And everyone, we'll see you again next week.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.